The way your emails are rendered is an attack vector for both tracking you and hacking you. When you view emails with either an email client or a browser, the application renders the content of what's been arbitrarily sent to you in that email by anybody. So that's the text, the HTML, scripts, tags, images, videos, header fields, and other objects that you receive in that email. So this means that third-party elements can reach out of the email to contact remote servers to attempt to track you. They can log your IP address, determine your browser or email client functionality, the plugins that you've got installed, pretty much of what we talked about in the section on tracking. Plus, the email can also attempt to hack you and inject malware through some sort of vulnerability in the browser or the email clients. So, first, let's have a look at tracking and privacy concerns and anonymity concerns when it comes to receiving emails. What we have here is a brilliant website. What this does is it will send a specially crafted email to you, and the content is designed to test the privacy leaks and security bugs within the client that receives that email. So let's give this a go. So I'm going to send an email to an email address that's accessible via webmail. So this is nathan@ghostmail.com. I'll send that. What we can see here is the various different methods that this email that's been sent to me can attempt to track me. So you can see here Apple tag, background attribute, CSS background image. So let's go here. And we can see, so I've got an email. So without opening it, nothing has been triggered. These go red when it's been triggered. So let's click here. We've got some sort of message here. Click here to download pictures. So we've not done anything. We've just clicked on it for the moment. And here we go. So these three elements, both CSS, HTML elements, have been triggered, sending information back to this remote server. So it knows essentially where I am. It's IP address here, and it knows the browser that I'm using, and potentially it can figure out more information as well. Now in Ghostmail, and probably most mail browsers, you've not really got much of a way to mitigate this. You'd have to have some sort of option that prevented remote content from being loaded, or you'd want to not render this email as HTML. You'd want to render it as something simpler like text. But this doesn't appear to have the functionality to enable you to do that. Also, if you clicked here, this would, I'm assuming, then increase, so that then we can see now the image tag has been triggered. So it had one preventative measure built in, but it was not preventing these methods here of tracking you. So if you use Ghostmail, you have to accept that every email that you open is potentially telling someone your IP address and what client you're using, and potentially more information. Let's try it now on an email client. I'm going to use iStuff, which is essentially Thunderbird on Debian, which is here. So let's send it to this email address. So we've got the same again. There we go. So we've got the email in the inbox. Let's just see if anything's happened. So nothing has happened from it just being in the inbox. Let's click on it. There we go. We can see more of the elements a little bit clearer here. Let's go back. And there we go. So it's triggered one. So it's still triggered one and given away information about the user agent and the location. The benefit of an email client is that you can prevent what it parses with more granularity. So if I go here, preferences and privacy, what I can do is I can actually disable all remote content from that message from being displayed, or rather being rendered. So there'll be no contact out of the email to the remote servers if I select this. And this is often the default. It's certainly the default in Thunderbird, but you need to check that. While we're here, let's not accept any cookies, because that's not a particularly great idea either. You don't really need them with an email client. Let's click OK. And let's go back here. And let's send another message. And let's click here. So what you'll see is you'll get a message saying there is remote content. What do you want to do about it? And it gives us some preferences here. Do we want to contact this server, this server? Do we want to contact all of them? And let's see if it's triggered anything. So no, it's not triggered anything. We're escaping the tracking and we're not contacting the remote server. Problem is, obviously, some of the functionality won't work, depending on what it is, remote embedded images, movies, things like that. Another way to prevent the content from being parsed is to view messages as plain text. If you view messages as plain text only, then it's not parsed. So that will really reduce the chance of you being tracked. So that's tracking. Now let's consider hacking. We've talked about browser and server vulnerabilities. So we know that webmail, like so, can be hacked. You can have vulnerabilities in the email clients like Thunderbird, like Outlook. And there's a recent example called Badwin Mail, which is a really bad vulnerability in Outlook. Let me just quickly show you. So let's press play here. What the guy's doing is sent an email to the recipient, and straight away this email has launched Calc, which means it can launch anything. All it needs to do, send an email. It's a specially crafted flash or other type of exploit that's been packed and delivered via something called TNEF email, or a message attachment. If you want to know more about Badwin Mail, then give this report name a search and you can find out a little bit more. It's quite an interesting one. Now, to mitigate both tracking and hacking when emails are rendered, you should be using compartmentalization where possible. All the other relevant security controls detailed throughout the course, like sandboxing, updates, disabling functionality, using plugins, anonymizing services if warranted. All those things will help mitigate email tracking and hacking. Specifically, also, as we've gone through, you need to find if you can disable the automatic downloading of remote content when you click on a message. This should be possible in email clients, but not possible in webmail, as I've mentioned. And it was here, preferences, privacy for Thunderbird, and that one needs to be disabled. You also want to disable cookies as well, make sure it doesn't record any history. And the other option that I mentioned was here, view messages as plain text. I would also suggest that a browser is more vulnerable to being exploited and dropping malware on your machine than an email client like Thunderbird. Plus, your adversary can take control of the web server hosting the webmail. He can then attack your browser without needing to send a distinct email that is restricted to the format of how emails can be received. No web-based attack vector exists if you use an email client like Thunderbird. I recommend the email client Thunderbird for security, or iStuff, which is called in Debian. If anonymity and privacy is important to you, then using webmail isn't really encouraged by me. At a stretch, you could try to find a provider that only uses HTML, so no JavaScript or Flash, to reduce your attack surface, plus isn't susceptible to the privacy test that we just went through. That's a pretty good test. If you care about attribution, you really have to assume the webmail is tracking you and use an anonymizing service. In your situation, it may not be a good idea to keep emails on the client, which restricts your use of an email client like Thunderbird. It might be safer to keep them just on a server that's out of the sphere of influence of your adversary, and therefore you do want to use webmail. In this case, you should set up an environment with isolation and compartmentalization that I've mentioned, plus anonymization services, all the good security controls discussed on the course, where you make it so that a browser compromise is controlled because you are planning for it to happen. For high security, privacy and anonymity with email, I recommend Thunderbird, PGP, and not using webmail if you can get away with it. And importantly, delete sensitive emails after you've read them, and always follow the OPSEC rules.